talking about this unit. So everybody go ahead, put up your phones for the lesson. Put them up. Alright, so we are combining what we learned about factoring from the last unit for finding what we called yesterday x-intercepts, zeros, solutions, roots, all those meant the same thing, right? What is an x-intercept? Where it crosses the x-axis. Very good. Okay, so today we're still figuring out where are those points where it crosses the x-axis, but today they're not going to give us a picture of the graph. We're going to have to factor to find where those are. So it gives us a list of steps here for how to do that. So solutions are the same thing as x-intercepts, is what it says here. So remember, all those words mean the same thing. We can factor a quadratic equation by setting it equal to 0. So it has to look like this. If there's anything on the other side, we got to move it over first. Okay? Factor it just like always. Then take your factors and set them equal to 0 and solve. Okay, so let's take a look at what exactly that would look like. Here, they've already factored it, right? You take it out of that parenthesis and set them both equal to 0 and then solve for x. So, on number 1, is it already set equal to 0? Yeah, it has equals 0 right there on the end, okay? And lucky for us, it's already been factored, right? We already have 2 sets of parentheses. So I don't have to do step number 2 either. So now I'm on step number 3, which says take your factors and set them equal to 0. So I'm going to take this parenthesis right here, 3n minus 4, and set it equal to 0. And I got to do the same thing for the other parenthesis. I'm going to have 3n plus 5 equals 0. And then we're just going to solve. Okay, so if I'm trying to get the n by itself, what should we move first? The 4. How do I move negative 4? Right. Okay, so now we just have 3n equals, what's 0 plus 4? 4. Good. All right. And how do we get rid of that 3 in front of the n? Divide. All right, so is 4 over 3 going to give me a nice number? We'll get a decimal, so we're just going to leave it as n equals 4 over 3. Okay? All right, got to do the same thing to this other one. So what am I going to move first? The 5. How do I move it? Good. All right, so what is 0 minus 5?
0.
Negative 5, right. 0 minus 5 is negative 5. Then what should we do? Divide. Again, if we divide negative 5 by 3, is it going to give us a nice number? No. So I'm just going to say n is equal to negative 5 over 3. So those are my 2 zeros. That's where it would touch the x-axis if I graphed it. Okay? All right, same idea on number 2. Step 1, is it equal to 0? Yeah, okay, so I'm good there. Has it already been factored into the 2 parentheses? No, so we're going to do that part. So remember when we factor, what do we look for first? G what? GCF, yeah, good. Does this one have a GCF? No GCF. Okay, so then we look for sum and product. What's the sum here? 3. And what's the product? Negative 28. Okay, so what's something that multiplies to give us negative 28? Seven and 4, okay. And since it's negative 28, one of those has to be a negative, right? Okay, so I need it to add to give me positive 3. So which one do I want to be the negative?
4.
The 4, very good. All right, so those are my picks. So I'm going to have x plus 7 and x minus 4 equals 0. All right, so we've done step number 2, which is factor. Step number 3 says we do what with our parentheses? Very good. So I'm going to take x plus 7 and set it equal to 0. And I'm going to take my other parenthesis, x minus 4, and set it equal to 0. All right, so if I want to solve for x, what are we going to do to move that 7? Subtract it. Okay, what is 0 minus 7? Very good. All right. For this other factor, what do we need to do? Good. And what is 0 plus 4? 4. So x equals 4. Oops. So those are my two zeros. X equals negative 7 and x equals 4. Okay? So basically, every single time we're just following this list of 4 steps. Sometimes we'll get lucky and some of the steps will already be done for us. Okay, number 3. Is that one set equal to 0 right now? No. So I need to move the negative 3x squared. How would I move it? What would we do? Add, right. I got to move the negative 3x squared to the other side. The opposite of a negative is a positive. So I add 3x squared to both sides. Over there, those go away. Are there any other x squareds on this side? No. So I don't put it with anything else, right? There's no like terms to combine. So I'm going to have 3x squared. Okay. Next, I want to put the term with the x. What has just an x with it? The negative 12. So I'm going to put negative 12x next. And then I put the number with no letters last, which is negative 15. Good. And I set that equal to 0. Okay. So step number 2, what does step number 2 say to do in the list? Factor it. Okay, so when we factor, what do we look for first? GCF. Okay, what's my GCF for this? 3. All right, so I'm going to divide all of these by 3. Put my GCF out in front. Here, my 3's just divide out, right? So what's left? The x squared. All right, what's negative 12 divided by 3? Good. So I have negative 4x. And what's negative 15 divided by 3? Very good. All equals 0. All right, so now that we've taken out the GCF, what's our sum? Very good. And our product is negative 5. Good. Yes, it is going to be 1 and 5. And one of those has to be negative. Which one? The 5. Very good. All right, so we've got our GCF. And then we have x plus 1 and x minus 5. Okay. Step number 3 says what? What do we do with all these factors? Right. Set them equal to 0. So the first thing we have is a 3. So I got 3 equals 0. Next, I have an x plus 1. X plus 1 equals 0. And next, I have x minus 5. X minus 5 equals 0. All right? Well, does 3 actually equal 0? So this doesn't work. Not helpful. We don't need it. Okay, but on these other ones, we can solve for x. So what do we do to solve that next one? Subtract 1. And what is 0 minus 1? Nice. And what do we do to solve the next one? Very good. And 0 plus 5 is 5. So there's our 2 zeros. All right. Okay. Number 4. Step number 1 one is we need to make sure it's set equal to 0, is it? So how do I move to 6x? Subtract. Okay. So is an x squared the same thing as an x? No. So I can't put them together. So I put the biggest exponent first. So I'll have 3x squared, and then I'll have my minus 6x equals 0. Okay, step 2 is to do what? Factor it. So what do we look for first? Good. What's my GCF here? Good. So I divide by 3. Here, my 3's divide out, right? Oh, yes, thank you. Very good. Yes, 3x is actually our GCF. So I take out my 3x. The 3's divide out, right? And we have an x squared, and I'm taking out one of the x's. So what does it become? Just x. And here, what's negative 6 divided by 3? Negative 2. And if I divide the x's, they're gone, right? So this is what we're left with. So do I even have an x squared anymore? So I'm done. I don't have to factor any further, okay? So I've got my factors. What's step number 3? Equals 0. So both pieces. So I'm going to have 3x equals 0, and I'm going to have x minus 2 equals 0. All right. So how do I get rid of that 3 in front of the x? Divide. And what is 0 divided by 3? 0. And what do we do for this factor? Add 2. Nice. And 0 plus 2 is 2. So there's my zeros, or x-intercepts, or roots, or solutions, whatever we want to call them. Okay? So that's the whole reason we learned what we learned in last unit, because this is what we can do. Okay? All right, flip it over onto the back. They got 2 word problems for us to look at. All right, number 5 says the area of a rectangular room is given by the equation 2w squared minus 2w equals 12, where w is the width of the room. Find the width and sketch a graph of the related quadratic function. All right, so we're still doing the same thing that we were doing on the front page. So what's step 1? Set it equal to 0. Good. So right now it's 2w squared minus 2w equals 12. So how am I going to fix it so it's equal to 0? Good. And that's not like anything on the other side, right? So I've got 2w squared minus 2w minus 12 equals 0. All right, so step 1 done. We got it equal to 0. What's step number 2? Factor. Okay. All right, so when I factor, I look for a GCF. Do we have one this time? 2. Okay. So GCF is 2. I'm going to divide these by 2. So those will divide out. So we're just left with w squared. What's negative 2 divided by 2? Negative 1, right? So negative 1w. And what's negative 12 divided by 2? Negative 6. Good. All right, so now that we took out our GCF, what's the sum? Good. And what's the product? Good. All right, so can you guys think of something that'll multiply to give us negative 6? 2 and 3. Very good. And one of them has to be negative. A 3. Very good. All right, so those are the ones we picked. Then we have 2 times w plus 2 and w minus 3. Good job. All right, so we factored. What's step number 3? Equal them to 0. So all my pieces, okay? So I'm going to have that my 2 equals 0, my W plus 2 equals 0, and my W minus 3 equals 0. All right, so in this first equation, are there any W's? No. And does 2 actually equal 0? So that's no help. We don't need it. Okay, what about that second one? What do we do there? Subtract 2. And what is 0 minus 2? Good. All right, and then what do I do for that last one? Okay. So I'll have, W equals 3. Okay. Now they did ask us to graph it, right? We just found these two zeros. 0 is the same thing as a root, as a solution, as an x-intercept. So what are those? Where do they go? On the x-axis. Very good. So here's my x-axis. I'm going to put 1 point at -2 and 1 point at 3. All right. Now remember, we said yesterday, if the number that's in the very front, right here, is positive, then it points up. But if there's a negative number in front, my arrows point down, right? So our number is 2. So is this going to point up or point down? Up. So I connect these, looking something like this. Okay. Remember, that's what we said these are. That's where it crosses the x-axis, is what we talked about yesterday. The y-intercept, what we solve here does not give us the y-intercept. No. And they just asked for a sketch, so we don't have to be exact. We have 2 points to base it off of, and we know it points up. So the rest is just a sketch. Okay? All right, now they did ask which one is the width. Well, width is how wide something is, right? Have you ever heard somebody tell you that the width of a box is -2 feet? No, because width can't be negative. So it wouldn't be that one, right? It would only be the positive, because you can't have something -10 feet wide or -100 feet long, right? Only the positive answer. Good. All right, last one. We got a multiple choice question here. This one says, which statement about this function is true? And look, all of these are asking for the what? The zeros. And the zeros is the same thing as the x-intercept and everything else, right? So same process. Okay, so first we need everything on one side. Do we have everything on one side? Yeah. So I've got my -x² minus 2x plus 15 all on one side equals 0. And then what do we do? Step number 2. Factor. Okay. So the factoring, the first thing we look for is a GCF. So this is a secret what in front of the x²? 1. So it's a -1. So we don't want our lead coefficient to be negative, so that's going to be my GCF, the -1. Okay? GCF, -1. So I go through, I divide all of these by -1. So here, my -1's divide out. And all I'm left with is x². What's -2 divided by -1? Good. And 15 divided by -1? -15. Good. All right, so now that we've factored out the GCF, what's the sum? 2. And what's the product? Good. All right, can you guys think of something that will multiply to give us 15? 3 and 5. Yes, one of them has to be negative, and it is the 3. So I've got -1 out in front for my GCF, and then I'll have x minus 3 and x plus 5. All right, so which one of the answer choices does that match? B. All right. So this one has the negative in front with an x plus 5 and an x minus 3. Good job.